Yeah!
Okay.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for being here on this blustery March afternoon. But we're here for a really wonderful reason, for Brooklyn's history. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today who I'll be introducing as they come up to give remarks. We are joined by Nikole Jones from the New York Times, biographer Paula Giddings, Marcia from the Brooklyn Historical Society, Regina Myer from the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, Joy Williams from the Brooklyn chapter of the NAACP. We have Assembly members Joanne Simon and Tremaine Wright. We have Jacob Morris, longtime community advocate who fought hard to make sure this day would come. We're also joined by Benjamin Duster, the great grandson of Ida B. Wells. To see that his family is here today. And we are joined by so many community leaders that have made today possible, so I want to thank you all for coming. We are here today to honor Ms. Ida B. Wells and the legacy that she has left behind of truth and justice. Ida B. Wells was an investigative journalist, a civil rights activist, an educator, a newspaper owner, a feminist, an NAACP founder, an originator of the National Association of Colored Women. And in everything that she did, she spoke truth to power and was uncompromising in her fight for racial justice. Ida B. Wells was born into slavery and fought her way through to live her life on her own terms, always refusing to conform. When she was in Memphis, she sued a train car company for forcing her to sit in the colored section of the train, and she won. She was a journalist who owned her own newspaper company and brought the lynching of Black Americans to the attention of the world. She fought for women's suffrage and called out racism in the suffragist movement, a message that we need to continue to fight for today. An important part of Ida B. Wells' history is the time that she spent here in New York City. It is not always remembered or acknowledged, and that is what makes today's honor so important. Her time in Brooklyn is part of our borough's history of resistance and perseverance, which has often been led by Black women paving the way. Ida B. Wells came here when she was fleeing persecution and looking for safety and freedom. Brooklyn was her refuge. She found support and community among women who lifted her up and helped her succeed. That is the Brooklyn that we all know and love. And it is the history that we need to continue to pass on to future generations. We're again in a period of persecution of refugees, of immigrants, of journalists, of people standing up to the status quo. And truth and justice can sometimes be hard to come by. More than ever, we need to remember the teachings of Ida B. Wells and speak truth to power. What would she call on us to do in these times, in this moment? We know the work she led is not over. Our school system is the most segregated in the country. Black New Yorkers disproportionately face discrimination in housing, healthcare, and the criminal justice system. More than ever, we need to commit to learning from and living Ida B. Wells' legacy of fearlessness. We need to take on our city's tough fights with conviction and clarity of values. I look forward to remembering that every time I pass her street sign and read this plaque about the impact that she has had on Brooklyn. We have a lot of statues in New York City of white men. It is a good day when we get to set down historical markers for the contribution of women of color in particular, who have made our city the place that it is. So I want to thank everyone who made today possible. I just want to acknowledge St. Boniface Church, who will be hosting the reception, Ellen Toscano, the NYU Tisch School of Arts in Brooklyn, Ro Rothblatt, NYC Freedom Trail, Metro Tech and JP Morgan Chase, Community Board 2, the Brooklyn Friends School, who's here after they led an abolitionist tour of the neighborhood this morning and stopped by 227 Duffield Street, the Schomburg Center of Research in Black Culture, our elected representatives, Congressmember Hakeem Jeffries, Congressmember Nydia Velasquez, Majority Leader of the Council, Lori Cumbo, public advocate Tremaine Williams, our borough president Eric Adams, and our assembly members Tremaine Wright and Joanne Simon. I also want to acknowledge Elizabeth Adams from my staff, who really did a tremendous amount of work putting today together. And so I want to follow our first speaker, who really needs no introduction. She's had an amazing impact in our moment here in America. From the New York Times, Nikole Jones.
I did not dress appropriately today. I'm dying over here. I'm so honored to be here. It's funny, a year ago I was in Chicago for the renaming of Congress to Ida B. Wells. So y'all are a little late, but I'm happy that my adopted home is taking this moment to honor a truly great American. You know, who we build monuments to, who we name streets after, is a testament to whose stories we want to tell, which legacies we think are important, and which narratives we want to tell about ourselves as Americans. The contributions of Black Americans and women, Black women in particular, are largely ignored in this city and across the country. Who matters and who doesn't can be told by who we choose to acknowledge in our public spaces in a public way. I would not dare to try to talk about the biography of Ida B. Wells with Paula Giddings standing right here. So I'm just going to quickly talk about what Ida B. Wells has meant to me. Many of you know my Twitter handle is Ida Bay Wells. I consider Ida B. Wells to be my spiritual godmother. When I was a young Black girl wanting to be an investigative reporter, I didn't see a single model of someone who looked like me who did that work. And one day I was walking in my college campus library and I saw the autobiography of Ida B. Wells. And of course I'd heard her name because she's one of the 5 Black people whose picture you see during Black History Month. But no one ever really told us what this journalist was writing about, and that she was writing about the racial terrorism that Black people experienced in a time when Black women didn't have the vote or much of a voice. And so while I had always seen white men held up as the model for being an investigative reporter, here was this woman born literally into slavery who was doing the type of courageous investigative reporting that I hope to do one day. One thing that we're not taught is Ida B. Wells was the innovator of investigative reporting techniques that all these white men we learn about use. That's right. Look at her pamphlet, The Red Record. She had 14 pages of statistics in The Red Record. She was the original data reporter and was the first person to actually track the number of Black men and women who were being lynched in this country. So she became the model for my own career, and I only hope to be as good of a journalist as she is. This forced forgetting, this erasure of all of the Black and marginalized people who have contributed to this country is intentional. It means that we continue to force to the margins those who have already lived at the margins. That's why I created the 1619 Project, to bring those who have been forced to the margins to the center of the American story where we rightly belong. And that's clearly what Ida B. Wells did with her work. When she said, wait a minute, Black men are not being lynched because they are sexually assaulting Black women. Black men are being lynched because when they're successful, that has to be taken away. And they're being lynched because they don't want Black people to actually speak out for their rights. So it gave way this notion that white people were practicing objective journalism and Black people were not. There's no such thing. We all are writing from our experiences, and that's what Ida B. Wells did as well. So that's why I think this street renaming does for us today is it centers the stories of Black Americans who helped to make this democracy what it was. There is much work to be done, but this is an important first step, and I'm honored to be a part of it with all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikole. Thank you. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Paula Giddings, who's a writer and historian. Among other publications, she is the author of Ida, A Sword Among Lions, a groundbreaking biography of Ida B. Wells' legacy and life. She is the Professor Emerita of Africana Studies at Smith College. Good afternoon.
Oh, gracious, what a wonderful occasion, what a wonderful day. Ida B. Wells would be so happy. I wanted to talk today about specifically about Ida in Brooklyn, because we don't talk that much about her in Brooklyn. Beginning in Memphis in 1892, Ida B. Wells took the nation's first anti-lynching campaign across the country and throughout the British Isles. But no stop on her journey was more important than Brooklyn. It was Brooklyn that gave her her first home in exile, here on Gold Street. An exile from the threat of death in Memphis, an exile from the destruction of her newspaper for free speech. It was in Brooklyn where she decided, quote, having lost my paper, had a price put on my life, I felt I owed it to myself and to my race to tell the whole truth now that I was here where I could do so freely. It was Brooklyn where her neighbor, T. Thomas Fortune, publisher of the New York Age, put her words on his front page with a screaming headline, "The Truth About Lynching." Wells' editorial was the first study of the practice in the United States. On those same pages, she wrote columns that celebrated friends who escaped the lyncher's grasp, columns about injustice. She compared black life in the North and in the South. In the South, she wrote, blacks had fewer rights, but more opportunity to engage in lucrative occupations. While in the North, blacks had rights, but were excluded from the trades by the unions. It was in Brooklyn where Ida was introduced to one of the great black cultural centers in the nation, perhaps in the world, at a time when African Americans were promoting literature that redefined and enlightened the race. Brooklyn was the epicenter with its Concord Literary Circle, the Progressive Literary Union, the Star Lyceum, and the Brooklyn Literary Union. As the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, a white newspaper, noted in 1892, quote, no other group of people were fonder of literary pursuits than Afro-Americans. It was in Brooklyn where Wells herself spoke on Afro-American literature before the Concord Literary Circle in the Concord Baptist Church, and was reported to have drawn the largest audience that ever attended a literary meeting in that city. It was in Brooklyn where Wells got her chops as a debater. After losing a debate to Marcia Lyons, a school principal whom Ida would later ask to tutor her in the art. It was Lyons who would bring Ida into the circle of black women activists like Sarah Garnett, New York's first black public school principal, her sister, Susan Smith McKinney, the first black woman to practice medicine in New York State, Victoria Matthews, a leading journalist. It was in Brooklyn where the idea was born to have a testimonial for Wells that would draw leading black women activists from not only New York, but Philadelphia and Boston. A testimonial where, following the speeches and the resolutions and the music, Ida would speak for the first time, about the lynching of one of her best friends in Memphis, a lynching that turned her into an investigative journalist and an insurgent. It was in Brooklyn where a seed was sown to turn the gathering of women here to join others across the nation to form the first black national organization of women in the country, the National Association of Colored Women, which helped her carry her campaign across the nation and became the foundation for progressive reform in the country. And it is Brooklyn where Ida B. Wells is recognized today through the efforts of so many who have gathered, where her spirit can now be made permanent feature
Next, I'd like to call up the president of the Brooklyn chapter of the NAACP, L. Joy Williams.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is wonderfully cold, but it is wonderful to have this brief moment of discomfort to come out here in Brooklyn, across the street from our office, and center Black women and girls in this country. Too often, as Nikole has mentioned, that we build monuments is a testament to who we honor, who we respect, whose history and legacy is important. And like you, who are out here this afternoon, we want to make sure that we are building lasting legacies and continuing to tell the stories of those whom we deem important in the communities that we've built. It is an immense pleasure to center Ida B. Wells, not only because of her accomplishments and her physically being in the space of Brooklyn, but because no matter how many small things we may have done to contribute to this moment, it would not be without her and her work, her advocacy and leadership. We talk about her as a founder, an early founder of NAACP, and those of you who know the history and have read the textbooks know that she at some point became disillusioned with the path that NAACP, or the direction that NAACP was taking. And even as a president, a leader within that organization now, I use her as a guidepost in trying to determine if the work that we are doing is too passive, if we are taking the easy way out, if we are saying maybe we don't want to ruffle too many feathers. So she is a guidepost that we should all center on whether or not the small things we may be doing to pursue justice, equity, and freedom, how radical really is it? And if we use that guidepost, if we let her lead the way, let Ida B. Wells lead the way in our work, in our history here in Brooklyn, then we can go beyond and make sure that there are not 50 years from now people still fighting the same fights. And I just wanted to bring our civic engagement chair, who is a diehard supporter, and Stephanie Zinnerman, and sort of leading our civic engagement team in the spirit of that same work.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning. I just want to say that it is a pleasure to be here in Brooklyn today, celebrating my heroine and your heroine, Ida B. Wells. When I think about the radical love that she showed after having experienced her best friends being lynched, but took that pain and used and developed a radical voice to encourage people to fight for what was right, to make sure that we were no longer being killed and slain. The fact that she came here and she was welcomed here after her life was threatened, and we embraced her. Every time I'm at Weeksville or if I'm downtown, I think about the work that she did, how she must have felt alone, but she took that pain and she took that isolation, and she inspired an entire nation, an entire movement. And so we are so proud of her, and we are so grateful that we can use her as an example to ensure that this new wave, they like to call it, this backlash that they like to call it, which never really went away, of hatred against melanin people, will end. We have to use our voices. We have to use our alliances to make sure that people understand that we are humans. This is about humanity and our shared humanity. And we cannot continue to accept the fact that there are people who want to continue to make Black people subhuman once again. So today we celebrate her legacy. Today we lift up the work that she's done. Today we remember the advocacy that she showed when Susan B. Anthony said, "You can't be a part of this march this time." And she said, guess what? We'll have our own march. So let's continue to lead the way and make sure that truth and justice remain centered in Brooklyn, New York,
Wright and Joanne Simon.
It's my district. So I just want to, just say, number one, how honored I am to be here today with all of these wonderful people, with Dr. Giddings and Nikole and Jones and Meljoy and my colleagues here. And thank you very much. So, we all know about Ida B. Wells' incredible work. I just want to say that, number one, this is a woman who exhibited such incredible raw courage that we need to honor and be infused by every day. This is a black woman who was born into slavery, who did investigative journalism and took on the terrorism of lynching early on, and really inspired and educated through that, and scared the heck out of a lot of people, obviously. And she really faced a lot of public disapproval, which is something that some of us in office are always concerned about, but she did that relentlessly. And even when she was criticized within the civil rights movement or within the suffrage movement. This year is 100 years of women's suffrage in the United States. And what we need to remember is what a daunting task that was, that there were divisions within that movement. And today, 100 years after women in this country got the right to vote, it was 50 years after African American men got the right to vote, that it is incumbent upon women to work together to make sure we are all there, that we are participating, we are at the table, we are with each other, empowering each other, and making sure that we get out and vote. This is a time when our country is creeping towards authoritarianism, and we really cannot let our foremothers' sacrifices and pain be in vain. And so I just want to say that again, this is such an honor, and I'm so happy to be here and share this with my good friend and colleague, Tremaine Wright.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm Tremaine Wright, the representative for the 56th Assembly District, but also the chairperson for the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. And we are so proud to stand here today as we celebrate Ida B. Wells. As most people know, everything good comes through Brooklyn. This is no different. Her presence here, this marker to help us remember her presence and the contributions that she has made to our communities is going to be fantastic. I hope that we continue to tell her story. I hope that we make sure that we inspire others to learn what these markers mean. We all know the names of our local streets. There has been a lot of work over the past 15, 20 years to add additional names, to code name, for us to have memory, for us to center people, and this is no different. We're bringing, just like it was said earlier, we're bringing the people who are at the outskirts to the center so that their stories and their narratives become part of our regular language, so that it's not a forgotten moment or that it's a special February moment. This is a 365-day-a-year moment. And I just want to encourage everybody here in Brooklyn to rally around, understand this is our history, that this is our collective history, and we all have to do the work collectively to remember. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've also been joined by representatives of our members of Congress, Melissa Ortiz, really quickly, and Marion Alam.
Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Where Brooklyn at? Where Brooklyn at? There you go. So today, in honor of today, we think today was a very, very special day. And the Office of Congressmember Nydia Velázquez wanted to recognize this in a very special way. And so when we slide that off, we're gonna pop a bottle because you need to toast this woman for all the efforts that she has done, for all the sacrifices that she made
for all the paths that she has paved for each one of us and for each one of these women of color that's standing behind here in office. Okay? So today we're going to celebrate in a big way. We're going to remember her. We're going to honor her. And please, when you come to Brooklyn, when you come to Abolitionist Way here in Brooklyn, that's right. Make sure that you point out to your children and to your children's children that the corner of Gold Street and Flatbush Extension is in honor of a very, very, very prominent woman that history will never forget. Thank you. There you go. Y'all pop that.
We'll bring it over to the church. We're also joined by Joseph Cerno from the mayor's office.
Hello everyone, my name is Edward Cerna. Edward, yes, not Joseph. Edward Cerna with the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs. On behalf of the Mayor's Office, I want to offer and extend the congratulations on recognizing an important figure in American history. Ida B. Wells used her power of investigative journalism to shed a light on the mistreatment of black people in this country. And she did so at a time when that meant that a possibility of bodily harm, but she wasn't scared, she fought on and she persevered. And so we honor her today for that. We honor her bravery, her resolve, and her contributions to our history. So glad to be here representing the Mayor's Office, and thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Thank you to the mayor for his support. I also want to now call up Marcia Eli from the Brooklyn Historical Society and Regina Myer from the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership.
Good afternoon, everybody. What an honor to be here representing the Brooklyn Historical Society. And I want to say just a few words about what this street co-naming and plaque mean to Brooklyn and its history. Today we are celebrating the fierce and courageous hero Ida B. Wells and the pride that Brooklyn has to have been home to such a leader. But we are also celebrating this moment as a shining example of the fact that history is not static. It is not set in concrete, but it is ever changing, many layered. It's a narrative that continues to be modified, augmented, corrected, recentered to tell the stories of African Americans. It's our duty as historians, but also as citizens, to push and push more, to pay public homage to heroes like Ida B. Wells. I want to thank Councilmember Levin for his vision to bring this moment to reality. You know, it has long been a fact that Brooklyn, New York City, and throughout our country, the history of people of African descent and the stories of heroes like Ida B. Wells were not central to the telling of the past. This is changing. I have to acknowledge and say how honored I am to be here with journalists like Nikole Jones, historians like Paula Giddings, other people like Brian Stevenson, activists and so on, who are making change. When we stand here on the corner of Fort Greene in this area, it is the site of one of the oldest African American communities in New York. In Fort Greene, a community of free black people prospered in the 1840s, and it was to Brooklyn and its neighborhoods like this one in Weeksville that in 1863, during the draft riots across the harbor, thousands of people of African descent escaped. When Ida B. Wells lived here on Gold Street a few decades later, Brooklyn was exploding in growth. We need to continue to fill in the historic record of Ida B. Wells' Brooklyn and her community, and we need more commemorative plaques and street namings and public recognition of that history. So Ida B. Wells is an example to all who live in Brooklyn and beyond of the change that is a fiercely courageous individual committed to the fight against racism, violent hate, and inequality. The Brooklyn Historical Society applauds City Council member Levin for leading the way in recognizing Brooklyn's connection to this remarkable woman. Ida B. Wells' way will be a constant reminder that history is in our hands and we can all play a role in moving it closer to a truly just and equal society. Thank you.
I'm Regina Myer, president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. I am so honored to be amongst the incredible line of speakers and people who worked so hard to bring the history of Ida Wells to this corner in downtown Brooklyn. When we see the sign and the plaque that the council member has worked with Chase in the city of New York to constantly remind us of the great work that Ida Wells did for all of us as New Yorkers and as Americans. I'm so proud that these signs will be here in our corners in downtown Brooklyn. So thank you all for being here. We really truly appreciate it.
Next up, I'd like to call Jacob Morris, who has done a tremendous amount of work calling attention to the great work of Ida B. Wells and in the history of Brooklyn. So, Jacob, you want to say a few words?
I'm almost speechless. You know, you can't do something like this without thanking people. So first I want to thank Dr. Paula Giddings. Because, you see, I read her book in 2009. And among other things, one of the things that I do is I name streets and parks and monuments, and mostly after great black people here in New York City. You know, nobody else was really doing it. And I found that I enjoyed doing it. My first street naming was Frederick Douglass Landing, where Chambers Street hits the Hudson River, because that was where he landed when he was 20 years old, 1838. And that was in 2005. And then I started naming streets all around the city. And so that's kind of something that I really, not getting paid, but I just liked it. You know, it's like it feels good. So then I read Paula's book. I was always like really, I knew about Ida B. Wells, but then you read her book and then you really know about Ida B. Wells. And she was so special. And I said, holy moly, there's a little paragraph in this big book. And she lived here, 395 Gold Street. This was little buildings and houses. And here now we got this point. Anyway, she lived here. And I read that and I said, I can get her honored. And it wasn't just that she lived here. It was that her time here in Brooklyn was critical to her growth as an activist, as an author, and as more than an influencer, to use a new social media term. And the women, the great other women of Brooklyn that she connected with, that connected with her, that, like Dr. Susan McKinney, the first black woman doctor in Brooklyn, Maritza Lyons, Sarah Garnett, Victoria Chapman, they helped her raise the money. Her newspaper had gotten burned out. She came here. They helped her raise the money so she could publish that first pamphlet, Southern Horrors, which brought the horrors of lynching in the South to life, that investigative journalism that inspired some wonderful journalists who are changing the world. So this is not the end. This street naming and the plaque, this is not the end. This is the beginning. We want more. We want more. We want a memorial in Abolitionist Place Park, a block and a half away, to honor Ida and her sisters in freedom, Maritza Lyons, Dr. Susan McKinney, Victoria Chapman, and Sarah Garnett, all together because they were a mighty force for change then, and something that we can carry forward now. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are so honored to be joined today by members of Ida B. Wells' family. I want to call her great-grandson, Benjamin Dunster, for his remarks, and then we'll proceed over to the street sign and also to the plaque here.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I guess, you hear everything, and thank you, Mr. Morris, for your idea to do this, but it's an honor because we heard stories from Ida's youngest daughter, who was my grandmother, throughout our lives about every life should be lived with purpose and principle. And it doesn't matter whether you think you're alone, whether you think in the end it's going to make a difference, that everything you do can make a difference. And we were taught that as young kids, and when I learned about some of the fights of Ida at 22, going up against a railroad company, having her business burned down, coming to New York and Brooklyn, finding kinship and love from the mentor. She didn't do it alone. We can't do anything alone. But she got so much love in Brooklyn and New York as an exile in her own country, the way New York has opened its heart to immigrants all over the world. And who would have thought this strong, courageous, fearless lady also had a soft side, where at 16, when they wanted to separate her from her younger siblings because her parents died of a yellow fever epidemic, she said, no, I'm not going to separate from my two younger siblings, one of whom was disabled. And so she carried that on, and who would have thought almost 100 years later, when I came of age as a young investment banker in New York, I was taken in by a Haitian immigrant family that was the parents of a friend from school, and they exposed me to life in New York. And it's changed me forever. My family is now here. This is two of my daughters, my youngest, my oldest, and great-great-grandchildren, and then my son's in the back and my wife somewhere. But the point is, New York is a special place, Brooklyn's a special place, and I just want you to know that the love you show and continue to show by fighting for what you believe in is never in vain. Ida didn't receive recognition during her life, but this is an example of what happens and how you never know how when you stand for something and you fight for something, generations to come will be moved by it. So thank you so much.
Tony Roche. I'm the Executive Director and Site Leader here for the Brooklyn Corporate Center on behalf of JP Morgan Chase. We are elated to have the opportunity to be a part of this celebration, this recognition of a phenomenal woman. On behalf of JP Morgan Chase and the 6,000 employees that we have here, we are so vested and so passionate about being part of the community here in Brooklyn, developing and growing and seeing how this thing moves forward, both personally and professionally. When I think about the accomplishments we are today, I, a father of a 7-year-old, young little brown girl, as well as a member of this community, I sit back and think about how far this community is growing. And I also think about the accomplishments of that woman and exactly what she brought to this community and us as a people. Partnering with Representative Levin, Jacob Morris, and several other individuals, we had the opportunity to bring something here to Brooklyn that's going to represent Ida B. Wells and her story, her journey, and we appreciate you all for coming out today. Without further ado, I'm hoping to have an opportunity, and I'm actually going to ask you if you can help us in unveiling a plaque that for the past year we've worked together in order to bring about and hopefully have this be a symbol and something that represents her legacy. So if we could, oh please, I'm sorry.
So this took a long time. This took a long time because
We can't hear you.
louder. It was so I had the idea to honor Ida here in Brooklyn in 2009, but I didn't do anything about that idea until 2014. I was responsible for Abolitionist Place in 2007. Woo! So, and Dr. Susan McKinney and Joan Maynard also here in Brooklyn. And so I like doing these honorings in Brooklyn because Brooklyn, I'll tell you, Brooklyn appreciates its history more than Manhattan. So 2014, I go before Community Board 2, and I go through the whole application process, and I do everything. But one of their guidelines for street namings is you got to get about 70% of people that live on the block to sign petitions. You see any people that live on this block? So I was stuck, and it's sad. The application to honor Ida B. Wells with the street naming sat in limbo till 2017. And then, by some wonderful occurrence, Councilman Levin hired a wonderful young lady, Elizabeth, who you met earlier, as his director of legislation. That's right. And out of the blue, her first week as director of legislation, she called me on her cell phone. And she said, Jacob, this is wonderful. This is very important. We should make this happen. I'm going, oh, yeah, we should. I'm going to get it on the community board agenda. Well, you know, when the councilman tells the community board, I want this, then all of a sudden things happen. Bang! 2 weeks later, we were on the agenda, made the presentation, it passes unanimously, and now I want to thank the committee that we presented before, because after they approved the street naming, they said, you know, we got to have a plaque that explains why we named the street. And so I want to thank the people on the community board's committee, the transportation committee, that approved and demanded, as part of the resolution of approval, are fabricating the plaque. And so they did it, and then it passed the whole board, and it lands on the councilman's desk, and he says, gee, a plaque. What are we going to do with a plaque? I said, I could design the plaque. I've designed other plaques. So I worked with my graphic artist. We designed a plaque. And then I sent the language to Dr. Paula Giddings, and she helped me revise the language. And then I worked with Tony and his excellent team. Excellent team. And I gotta say, this guy is a great team leader. And we made it happen. And this wonderful council person over here, this guy, he gave a little discretionary money so we could get the plaque made. So